And welcome to Conversations. My name is Jason Plotkin. I'm the Program Director at Congregation Emanu. And every week we sit down with a member of the congregation, the community, or perhaps even from the sports world to discuss the current state of affairs. As individuals that live on states that sit on the Gulf of Mexico, we're all familiar with hurricane season and its impacts on our community. There have been devastating storms in recent years, from Katrina to Ike, Harvey, and of course, most recently, Laura. Hurricane Laura, in my humble opinion, has not gotten the attention it deserves due to a super active news cycle. Today, we're going to talk about Hurricane Laura and learn of its impacts on one of the Jewish communities that it affected with Rabbi Cantor Raina Siroty of Gemiluth Chassodim in Alexandria, Louisiana, a synagogue that was founded in 1859, and like our congregation, Emmanuel, a member of the Reform movement. Welcome to Conversations. How are you today, Rabbi Cantor?
I'm doing well, Jason. You could call me Rabbi Raina. That's fine.
Rabbi Raina. I've heard that from friends in Louisiana. So again, thank you for coming on. And before we begin talking about Hurricane Laura, I really think it's important to learn a little bit about you and your journey to become a member of the clergy. And of course, I'm told you have a classmate with Emmanuel connection, so we'll definitely want to make sure to mention that.
Okay. So I was a voice performance major at the University of California in Santa Barbara, and really was training to become an opera singer, but really was involved in Hillel in college, and really just loved the idea of singing Jewish music, being part of the Jewish community, and decided after college that I wanted to go to cantorial school. And my dear mentor, Cantor Evan Kent, who worked at Temple Isaiah in Los Angeles, helped me on that path to become a cantor. And in 2005, I, along with your cantor, Roland Simmons, joined the class of 2010, the Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religions cantorial class. And we spent a year in Israel, and then 4 years on the New York campus studying to become cantors. And I was ordained in 2010 as a cantor and served a congregation in Toledo, Ohio for a few years, ultimately deciding that I wanted to add a little bit more to my cantorate and decided to go back to the Hebrew Union College, this time on the Los Angeles campus, to become a rabbi, which I was ordained in 2017, and led me to Congregation Gemiluth Chassodim in Alexandria, Louisiana. I love the South. I was surprised that I was going to love the South. Actually, I was born in Macon, Georgia, but moved to Los Angeles 8 weeks after my birth. So my congregants here say, no, you were always from the South. You just lived somewhere else. And have been serving this congregation. I'm starting on my fourth year of this position.
So kind of building on that, I lived in Louisiana for 8 years in New Orleans, and I worked in college athletics, and we played Northwestern State in Natchitoches. So I'm used to driving up through Alexandria, up I-49. You brought up you grew up, well, you were born in Macon and moved to LA. What are some of the neat things about living in Alexandria, living and working in Alexandria that you can share with us?
I think it's really been a wonderful opportunity to be part of a small Jewish community. Most of the communities that I've been a part of have been quite large in major metropolitan cities. But that really the wonderful thing about being in a smaller community in the South is that the generations have stayed here, and so that we have grandparents that bring their children and grandchildren to Shabbat services, unfortunately now a little bit over Zoom, but still those families are still together on Shabbat. And you really get to know your congregants very well because they really are integrated into every aspect of life here in Louisiana, not just congregational life. And you see them and you are able to really get close to them. The children in the religious school, we have a small religious school. I know the children very well. And it's really been able to help me forge relationships with them on a very personal level, that even if I see them somewhere, they will introduce me to their friends, if we're in the supermarket or at the mall. And it's really been very special to be able to be part of that.
Well, when we had Amy Asen on a few weeks ago, she told us about how many of the Reformed synagogues are really these small communities, and here in Houston, we might not be as exposed to that. And you kind of brought up that you were able to build these close relationships. I think what's really fascinating is your synagogue was formed in the middle of the 19th century, about 1859.
Mm-hmm.
Give us a little more insight into the Jewish community of Alexandria, because I think when we think of Jewish communities in Louisiana, we might think of New Orleans because we have a tight relationship with that community, and to some degree Baton Rouge. But tell us a bit about the Alexandria community, if you will, and the synagogue, the history of your synagogue there.
So as you said, that it was founded in 1859. First, as most Reformed congregations, the first thing that you need to have is a cemetery before you even have a synagogue building. And so it began as a benevolent society. And because the Jews that came, mostly the original families came from Alsace-Lorraine in France. And we still have generations of some of those original families that have been in Alexandria since 1859. And they really came here. They came down the Red River, and they came down the Mississippi. And because the South needed merchants, a lot of these families started mercantile stores, which then, in the late 19th century, 20th century, have become different stores, clothing stores. We have a family that sells, the armed forces uniforms, and that they really wanted to create a community. And since then, since 1859, this congregation, regardless of size, has had a full-time rabbi, first as a reverend, because as a classical Reformed synagogue, that's what their roots were. And soon we had rabbis, all from the Hebrew Union College. And it's really just a wealth of historical information. This congregation's been very good about keeping historical records. Rabbi Martin Henshin wrote a book from the beginnings of this congregation to the 1920s, and we have notes from another Rabbi Emeritus, Arnold Task, covering from that time up until about the 60s. And we have wonderful biographical information about the families that have lived here for this long.
Wow. So let's turn to the present day, if you will, and talk about the pandemic first before we get into the mix there. But the pandemic obviously has been a challenge, and your synagogue, like all others, have moved to a virtual community. I really like to expose our people to what's going on at other synagogues when we get a chance, and really enlighten them to how other synagogues have kind of pivoted with the pandemic. Can you give us some insight into what your synagogue has done? I know you did a virtual Seder early on, what that experience was like.
It was definitely a very interesting experience to do the virtual Seder. We made sure that our congregants had all the things that they needed for the Seder. It's not easy to get a lot of kosher for Passover things in Alexandria, Louisiana. So we are fortunate that we ordered things from Kosher Cajun in New Orleans to be able to make sure that we had, enough matzah, gefilte fish, and things like that for the Seder. I created a Zoom Seder for our congregation and put it side by side when I led the congregational Seder. We had a very, very nice group of people from our congregation for the second night Seder. And they seem to really have liked it. And it was really the first time since the beginning of the pandemic that we had a nice majority of our congregation together. And one of the best things that we love to do is that after services or after a get together online is that we keep the windows open and everyone gets to chat. And it's really a very Hamish situation. And it's really, helped the congregation stay in contact with each other, seeing each other. The kids love to bring their animals up onto the Zoom screen. And it was with an unfortunate circumstance of not being able to meet in person. Our second night Seder is probably one of the largest events that we have during the year, other than for the High Holy Day services. So it was sad to not be able to be together in person, but we were still able to have a Zoom Seder that brought people together.
So to kind of piggyback on that, I think it's always neat to learn what some of the highlights are. You mentioned the children bringing the animals on. For me, it's opportunities like this one to engage with colleagues and counterparts from across the nation, whether it's something as simple as this or some other programming. What are some of the other highlights that you've enjoyed during the pandemic? Maybe something that you think will continue on even after, once things get whatever to the new normal they may be?
So I've started Zoom with the rabbi. So on Wednesdays at 10 a.m., anyone's allowed to come on and we'll either just chat. At the beginning of the pandemic, it was, where did you find tomatoes? And now it's more of, talking about whatever is going on in people's lives. We've had Ask the Rabbi questions. So that's pretty well attended on Wednesday mornings. We sit back and we have our cups of coffee or tea. Also with my pre-confirmation students, we meet and we will talk about what's going on in their lives. And it's become, a little bit more of a therapy session for the teenagers, because they have been so overwhelmed with school on Zoom. Actually, all of them have gone back in person as of today, but at the beginning of the pandemic, that was the way that we were able to connect. And since we had a small group of congregants that came for Erev Rosh Hashanah, two of my pre-confirmation students were at services, and they are itching to come back to their confirmation class in person. So we're hoping to be able to do that now that we are in phase 3.
That's really neat. And I should have mentioned this earlier. For those who are watching, we're literally recording this between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. It will air 2 days after Yom Kippur, but just as a point of reference, I apologize for not mentioning it earlier. We are recording this between the holidays. And now, let's shift to the hurricane. Obviously, a pandemic is never a good thing, but add in a hurricane, it's not a good mix in any sense. So as Hurricane Laura developed, it was clear that it was going to come up, around Lake Charles, Lafayette, between there and hit Alexandria. What were some of the steps you were taking as a congregational community? I mean, earlier you mentioned that the congregation and the community is really ingrained with each other. What were some of the things you guys were doing ahead of that storm to prepare, whether it's your synagogue or to help your congregants who knew that this was coming their way?
We went back to the good old phone tree, and I called someone and they called someone else and they called someone else, and the matriarchs and patriarchs of the larger families in our congregation were able to call me back and tell me how everyone was doing, which was much easier to be able to make sure that everyone was taken care of. And so we did that, and we really were very surprised at how strong Hurricane Laura actually hit Alexandria. And I have a 94-year-old congregant who said to me he has never witnessed a hurricane so strong in his entire life. Wow. And he's lived here for a long time. And for it to be Category 3 when we are so far from the Gulf is extremely frightening. That being said, we were very, very fortunate to have sustained what we would consider mild to moderate damage in the city and for our congregants in comparison to our congregation in Lake Charles. But we have been a lot of people were out of power for a few weeks. We had damage to our homes, but we were very fortunate that none of it was catastrophic enough to have to permanently relocate, nor, of course, that no one perished.
Right. And your synagogue building also sustained damage. Tell us a bit about what kind of damage you guys received and where you are in getting things back to order. I know you mentioned Rosh Hashanah services in person took place, so we know you're able to do that. But what are some of the things that you had happen at your building?
So the full wall of windows at the front of the office side of our building was blown out. So we came back and basically you could just walk into the building. And half of the side of the sanctuary's windows were also blown out. It was really sad because we have a 6-branched menorah that is in the window, and when we came into the sanctuary, it was totally bent out of place and was hanging inside their sanctuary. And that was a very tragic thing to see. We also have roof damage and gutters that were kind of bent into all kinds of modern pieces of art that we're trying to get fixed. Fortunately, we were able to board up the windows that needed to be fixed so that we were able to function in the building. That being said, I was looking for a backup for our internet because that has been very, very shoddy. As I said to you before, we even had a little bit of internet problems right before I signed on with you. So we're slowly but surely working back to getting into whatever 2020 was normal of the beginning of August, and trying to put back the pieces to add some semblance to our lives again.
So in addition to your synagogue, you mentioned that your community was impacted, obviously. Several congregant businesses were damaged. And I think I saw on Facebook that you referenced that you actually had damage to your home. But, I think one of the things, and you kind of talked about this a bit earlier when you were talking about the check-ins on Wednesdays and with your pre-confirmation class, what has your biggest need as a clergy member been to provide comfort? I mean, what are the needs that you as a clergy member are currently providing to those who are dealing with damage to their homes or businesses or mentally, physically exhausted from everything that's going on right now? What kind of comfort are you being able to provide?
I think that just my congregants knowing that they're able to contact me at any time to talk about the issues that they're having, the frustrations, the sadness. Certainly, one of the things that my congregation was particularly sad about was not being able to fully gather as a congregation like they had for the years before in person. And they know that it's not as easy as it seems. And many congregants have made the decision to not come back until we find a solution to COVID, and are okay with this new normal of being in their homes for services and being able to just speak to me via Zoom or over the phone or by email. But certainly just being a listening ear, I think, has been the most important part of my rabbinate at this point. But it also, adding to trying to help others in this situation with COVID. As a congregation, had Hurricane Laura happened when we didn't have a pandemic, there would be so much that we would be able to do person to person that we just aren't able to do now for the safety of our congregation. And because our congregation is one of a varying age, and a lot of our congregation are over the age of 65, and the CDC says, CDC says to not, to really socially distance and stay home if you can. Their hearts are in the right place, but their bodies can't be. And that's probably really something that is difficult, and something that I am trying to help my congregants understand, that we need to figure out ways to be able to help others without being physically able to help them.
Right, and it's such a challenge. I think the pandemic certainly has made, even life cycle events be such a challenge when we want to show comfort. But with a storm, you want to help out, but you also have to be mindful of the various social distancing and other health parameters that we have to think of.
It is the hardest thing to have to officiate at a funeral and not be able to physically comfort a mourner.
Right. Yeah. The whole thing is a challenge, as our clergy know, as as clergy everywhere know, and it really is something. And so to continue on about the storm, we've had a lot of people ask how they can help the community in Alexandria and Lake Charles. My friend Kate Clodeau at the New Orleans Jewish Federation, from my days in New Orleans, I know that in New Orleans are spearheading some of the efforts to take care of these Jewish communities impacted. What are some of the immediate needs that you're seeing in your community? And then B, if you have some ideas of resources that I can point people to, I'm again happy to post this in the Facebook where this will go live and in the YouTube. But what are some of the things that we can do to provide support from Houston, or quite frankly, anyone can watch this video. So from any points in between.
So definitely, I think that one of the things that our community is dealing with is trying to be able to fix the things that need to be fixed in their homes. That the Jewish Federation in New Orleans has been spearheading the financial arrangements of that, and people have been making donations to the Federation, to the Hurricane Laura Relief Fund, as well as sending donations directly to our congregation for relief as well. Some congregations have been sending gift cards. Some have sent checks. Some have just even sent notes of support, that we're thinking of you, specifically congregations that have gone through this and know the difficulties of an aftermath of a hurricane. And just even knowing that people are thinking about us is really a wonderful thing. But those are the organizations that are trying to help us out financially to be able to get our congregants, get our city back up on its feet. And the Federation has really been very helpful with that, and will be.
Yeah, so for those watching, I will put the links to the Jewish Federation and also to Rabbi Raina's Synagogue on the Facebook and the YouTube, so you can click and see what they're doing, and if you're able to, you can help out. So we're gonna, for the last 2-3 questions, we're going to talk about the High Holy Days, because this will air right after Yom Kippur, but I really think it's neat, and you alluded to this earlier, that you were able to do some form of services in person for Rosh Hashanah. You mentioned the pre-confirmation kids, but what was the experience like having even 30 people in the building for Rosh Hashanah? How meaningful was it for you to be able to have people in the pews when you've been doing primarily the Zoom experience for the last few months?
It was definitely it definitely helped me lead High Holy Day services, to see a few people in the pews. They were congregants I haven't seen in person in many months now. And I really think that for them, that if they were able to make that decision, and it was health-wise okay for them to do so, it was really lovely to be able to see them in person, be able to hear responsive readings. Certainly helps with worship. And it helped me feel like it was a little bit more, brought back a little bit more normalcy into a crazy time. But I am also happy to see my congregants on Zoom. It certainly was different. People were not dressed up as they would have been coming into Rosh Hashanah services, but it was really lovely because some of my congregants had their grandchildren that were there. And so I saw peaks of grandkids and children at the adult service, and being able to spend time with them and be able to ask questions because they were on mute to their parents. And so it wasn't as a formal Erev Rosh Hashanah service or Rosh Hashanah service as there might have been, but it was definitely a warm experience to be able to have everyone gather.
That's really nice. It really is. And then, kind of piggybacking on that, a few weeks ago, we had two colleagues of mine from other synagogues who actually grew up at Emmanuel and now are professionals, like I am. Like, this High Holy Days is like the great unknown. We didn't know what we were getting into until we got there. And David Tanner, who's helping behind the scenes, also knows this feeling. But what were some of the challenges that you had to navigate? Obviously, with you having the Zoom, you had people on Zoom, and then you had a few people in the pews. Interesting balance. What were some of the challenges, maybe that you weren't expecting? But certainly that's a challenge too. But what were some of the interesting things that you experienced from navigating this unfamiliar territory?
I think one of the hardest things for me was being able to abridge the liturgy when Rosh Hashanah morning services are usually 2.5 hours long. It's a very long time to be on Zoom. And so trying to figure out the balance of what prayers are we going to focus on for our service, not having a full shofar service, not having the children blowing shofar for the Tikiyah Gedolah was difficult. But I think that every second of every day is just a little bit different and a little surprising. And so perhaps one of the things that has happened in this pandemic is that you need to let go of the control that you might want and strive for and desire. And ultimately, if you're able to create a prayerful experience for yourself and for your congregation, that's really what's going to be remembered about the High Holy Days of 5781. Then a blip in the Zoom call, or a camera shot that didn't go at the way that you wanted it to. So I think that's probably what I will remember most about this High Holy Day season.
And then my last question is this: I always like to end with a positive or a takeaway, and I think you as a rabbi, a member of the clergy, there's certainly been some experiences that were unexpected, that were positive, that have really resonated with you. Is there something you can share with us that really sticks out as something like, that was really neat that this experience happened, or I was really shocked that this went this way, but it ended up being beautiful and we'll do it again in the future?
I definitely think we did not have online services before the pandemic. And one of the wonderful things for me is that my family, who I don't get to see very often as a busy Rabbi Cantor mom, that I get to see my family for services. And so I have family that have been able to join me for Shabbat and for Rosh Hashanah that have never been with me for worship. And that's been a really wonderful and comforting experience for me, not being able to see them in person, but being able to see them almost weekly online. I've made a few more observant Jews since the beginning of March in my family, so that's been exciting, and that's been probably one of the wonderful things that has happened since March.
Wow, that really is a neat story, and I really do think that people are connecting with old friends, colleagues, and family members. That certainly is a benefit of the pandemic.
And
But
definitely had congregants that moved out of Alexandria that have come back to Zoom services and said hello, like our Rabbi Emeritus who moved to Arizona. So
oh wow,
it's
yeah.
been
So everyone comes home
right.
during high holy days, whether it's probably easier now via Zoom or even like you said, a Shabbat. But I would like to thank you, Rabbi Raina, for coming on. I really hope that our audience today got to learn a little bit about you, about the synagogue in Alexandria, and just the impact of Hurricane Laura on your community. So thank you.
You're welcome. And please, anyone who wants to check out our website, www.jewishtemple.org.
Yeah, that's one of the easiest URLs for a synagogue out there. So
Absolutely.
kudos to whoever thought of that.
Yeah.
But yeah, thank you for coming on. I, again, always like to thank David Tanner, who's behind the scenes, who helps us do these. But as a reminder to our guests, our next broadcast is Wednesday, October 7th at 12 o'clock, as we welcome Mark Eichenbaum, our congregant, and he's also the special assistant to Mayor Turner for homeless initiatives. Mark's visit is part of a week of opportunities to learn and discuss homelessness in Houston, and we're going to be doing several things during Sukkot as we kind of pivot to a week of looking at the homelessness situation and how we can solve it and be a help to the resolution, if you will. So as, of course, a reminder, if you missed any episodes, you can always catch the archives on our YouTube page. And again, we'll see you next Wednesday at 12 p.m. on the Emanu Facebook, YouTube, and our website on the Polar Chapel streaming. Wish you well, and we'll, again, look forward to the next guest. Take care.